My weekday routine is to wake up to a cup of coffee, try to catch up with the news while I hop around and try to get on my gym clothes to go play racquetball. As soon as I can, I head over to my old health club where there are still about a half a dozen men who are old enough to remember what racquetball is. We range in age from about 50 to 83, and I'm not proud to say that my win-loss ratio with the 83-year-old ex-Marine is about 1 to 5. He is amazing, and I kind of hate him. But I recently had to call for the club's security guard to come and help me with a guy who had become absurdly difficult. The guy in question, when he learned that I'm a minister, began to try to talk church business with me, Jesus stuff. And when he learned that I'm not a traditional Christian, that I don't believe in heaven and hell, souls, demons, angels, supernatural theism, nor the Loch Ness Monster, the Tooth Fairy, or regardless of my appearance, I don't even believe in Santa Claus, he became enraged. And day after day, he would try to debate me using biblical quotes that he really wasn't capable of understanding, and eventually, by shouting at me with a really creepy smile on his face, telling me that I'm going to hell. When the other guys tried to get him to leave me alone, he shouted even louder that I was teaching a false gospel and leading people astray. I repeatedly told him that I just didn't want to discuss religion with him, but nothing could seem to stop him. So when I refused to play racquetball with him anymore, he started putting scripture quotes in my gym bag. After several complaints about his harassment, the club finally told him that they would ban him from the club if he bothered me again. Now, I've lived in Kentucky, where I grew up, Tennessee, Missouri, now Florida. So I've had a lot of exposure to right-wing evangelicals. And even though through the years I've gotten a lot of hate mail and even some called in and emailed threats, I've never encountered anyone who was so singularly obsessed with trying to make me afraid of going to his imaginary hell. Sadly, this annoying character is neither unique nor rare. He is a man who is trapped in a prison made entirely out of religious beliefs that have been drilled into him probably since early childhood. It's a prison composed of absolutes. As I mentioned in my last message, there are religions that have taught people that God will send you to hell if you get a divorce or if you're gay. Others adamantly insist that you'll go to hell unless you are a part of their specific little group, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Church of Christ, the Mormons, or in many instances, the Roman Catholics. My in-laws, decades ago, went to a non-instrumental Church of Christ, and they believed that you not only had to be a Christian with all of the inherent dogmatic teachings that are usually involved with Christianity, but you also had to be baptized, but not just baptized. You had to be baptized by immersion, and if you went to a church that used instrumental music in their services, an organ, a piano, or God forbid, a guitar or drums, that you would go to hell for that. Now, how could anyone actually, week after week, worship such a petty God? I was a young philosophy major in college when I gave up on believing in hell. It was simply too absurd to think that any deity could be so cruel and so inexcusably mean as to set up a universe so that most relatively innocent people ended up being tortured for eternity. But for a whole lot of people, hell poses the threat by which they are taught how to behave, how to control themselves. And your mind adapts to the environment in which you are raised. Thankfully, most of us have thought our way out of that mental prison, but many, many people never do. They are not taught to refrain from stealing or lying or using drugs or getting drunk or paying for sex because such bad things are just bad for you and bad for the society, that they reflect a lack of character. They are taught that their morality is rooted in fear of punishment, eternal punishment, fire and brimstone, agony without end. And when such a person encounters someone who just patently refuses to get trapped in that exchange of piety to avoid eternal fire, they are terrified that they too might be infected by what this guy calls a false gospel. A guy who finds his fear to be laughable. And when you've been taught to stay out of saloons and brothels lest you be thrown into hell, and you start to think that maybe all that hell stuff is just made up to control you, then what is there to keep you out of saloons and brothels? I suspect for people like my racquetball playing acquaintance, not much at all. It may be that fear is the only thing, even in his old age, that has constrained his behavior for decades. Now, this is an extreme case, but for the whole of the church, for people that go to temple, to mosques and cathedrals, those people are still taught that the world is defined by certain moral absolutes that have come down to them from God. This is part of what fascinates me about the public attention given to the election of a new Catholic Pope, replete with all of the hand-wringing about whether this new Pope will approve of gay marriage or not. Will he consider ordaining women? And might he do something crazy, like suggesting that eating meat on Friday is a mortal sin? I can barely keep from yelling at my TV during their around-the-clock coverage of the new Pope that no one can decide for the rest of the world, if being gay is a sin or not. No one can rationally say that you have to have a penis to be able to preach, to consecrate communion, or baptize someone. Folks, I hate to be this graphic, but I've been baptizing, serving communion, and preaching since 1978, and I have never once used my penis in the process. What on earth are people thinking? What kind of genitalia-obsessed deity would make a rule that allowed morons who were male to preach while keeping brilliant, educated women out of the pulpit? Honestly, people, this should be embarrassing to you. This surely amounts to blasphemy to accuse God of being so stupid, if such a thing as blasphemy exists. My favorite quote from the late Pope Francis was when, in reference to gay relationships, he said, "Who am I to judge?" Yes, amen. You're no one to judge. Not a pope, not an imam, not a rabbi or a priest gets to dictate moral absolutes to other people. But the difficult thing for many people who spent their lives trapped in the mental prison built by religious teachings is when you step out of that cage, you have no one to give you moral boundaries. Sure, we have laws, there are the police, there's courts, which are hopefully crafted to protect the well-being of society. But on a personal level, the horrifying reality is that once you get out of that prison, you have to think for yourself. And like it or not, morality is always a moving target. I trust that we can all agree that pedophilia is wrong, even if they still agree to the proposal, no 9-year-old child should be allowed to get married. Still, we know that no one less than the Prophet Muhammad, while in his late 50s, married his third wife, Aisha, when she was 6 years old. Many of his friends told him it was a bad idea, but it was still done in the 7th century. And Muhammad defended the marriage, saying that he did not consummate the marriage to Aisha until she was 9. But that doesn't really help very much, does it? But even though that was 1,300 years ago and took place 8,000 miles from those of us here in America, many modern Muslims have spun like tops trying to deny the historical fact that Muhammad married a child. But it was accepted as a fact for centuries until modern defenders of the faith have tried to silence those who repeat those historical facts. But you know, it was 1,300 years ago, it was 8,000 miles away, so you might find it even more disturbing to learn that less than 200 years ago, the famous American writer and poet, Edgar Allan Poe, at the age of 27, married Virginia Clem, who was 13 years old, which has made a bit more of a bitter pill to swallow since Virginia was also his first cousin. 1836, just not that long ago, and not very far away at all. It was not uncommon to marry a cousin in the 19th century. But still, was it wrong? My 18th century paternal family ran a slave plantation in Kentucky, on which they built, for the community's good, a non-instrumental Church of Christ, where it was morally fine to own dozens of slaves, but if you played a piano during your Sunday services, you would go to hell. Religion can be very funny that way. In the mid-1990s, I actually got involved in Missouri state legislature to amend the state's crime bill. I was teaching religion at Drury University at the time and learned that one of my students, a 19-year-old woman, was working at a local strip club, and that she and her boyfriend were having fights over the fact that she at 19 could go in there and do lap dances naked for total strangers, but he at 20 could not enter the club to protect her from sexual molestation or rape. The irony was a little too much for me, and I had recently officiated at the wedding of my state legislator, so I used my contact with him to get an appointment in his office where I insisted that if a 20-year-old man is not old enough to go into a strip club, that an 18-year-old girl shouldn't be allowed to give naked lap dances there. It was a small victory and a short-lived one, as my student assured me that she and all of her fellow dancers simply obtained fake IDs and went right back to work. But I tried to protect them, even if they didn't want to be protected. But I hope that you get my point. Neither religion nor the law, and certainly not a majority public opinion, can dictate moral absolutes. I don't believe that God had anything to do with the writing of the Bible, the Talmud, the Quran, or the Upanishads. I don't believe that God rewards piety or punishes sin. But even still, I don't use drugs. I don't get drunk in saloons. I don't pay for sex. Not because of God, a church, a priest, or even the law. I choose to live by a different moral code because I don't want to be the kind of person who exploits the vulnerable or puts society at risk, especially driving under the influence. My religion does not demand that I be a good person. It's really the other way around. I'm religious because I'm striving to be a good person. God doesn't create a moral society through religious laws and a threat of judgment. People who want to be good people create religions that might offer guidance, even, we have to admit, that they make a host of mistakes along the way. There are no hard and fast rules. We have to be willing to enter into dialogue with the moral universe every single day. I've been to Honduras several times. I've been there enough to know that children are commonly used for agricultural labor. So when I see fruit or melons from Honduras in my neighborhood grocery, I refuse to buy them. However, I do have an Apple iPhone, an Apple Watch, and an iPad in my hands several hours a day, and this sermon was written on an Apple MacBook. And I'm pretty sure that child labor and sweatshop conditions were a part of all 4 of those products coming into my possession. And the mere fact that I like them, or that I'm addicted to them, and owning them is legal and everybody else does it, that isn't really a very good argument. That's the argument that Muhammad and Edgar Allan Poe just used to justify their marriage choices. That's how my ancestors justified the uncompensated intern program for African immigrants on their plantation. We all know that ethics cannot be determined by just what is legal or by the marketplace, and certainly not by public opinion. I might be inclined to try to convince Tim Cook that Apple's labor practices are wretched, but in the meantime, I'm still not willing to give up my Apple products, at least not yet. And I know that at least some of you are probably still stuck 5 minutes ago when I told you that I tried to set an age limit on when a young woman could be exploited by the sex industry, thinking that if they wanted to work there, that it was none of my business. And I will tell you that if you think that, I think you suck. But this is a one-way form of communication, and there's nothing that either one of us can really do about that. I'm saying that if you lack moral clarity, if you need a religion to define the boundaries of what is and is not moral, I'm saying that you don't have a deficiency of religion. You have a deficiency of conscience. And conscience, sadly, is not innate. You're not born with it. Having a conscience is a matter of choice. And unfortunately, it's a choice that many people have simply failed to make. While I have my own failings and hypocrisies, to the extent to which I am a good person, I am a good person only because I have been radicalized by basic decency and nothing more than that. I'll have more to say on this topic in my July 6th message at the Unitarian Church in Vero Beach, which will be posted here on July 13th.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.